In the next 10 minutes, I'll show you the exact process I use to bring portraits like this to life in Procreate Dreams. Let's start from scratch. First, we establish our foundation. I'm using a simple oval for the head and then adding guidelines. This center line helps us keep everything symmetrical, and the eye line sits right here in the upper third. This is crucial for natural-looking portraits. Now for the features. I'm using my 5-space eye rule here. If you haven't seen that tutorial, I'll link it in the cards. The eyes are the most important part because they'll carry our animation later. Notice I'm keeping everything loose right now. We'll refine it in the next stage. This character has a turban and mustache, which adds personality. When you're planning animation, think about what elements can move independently. The mustache can wiggle, the turban stays mostly static. This planning saves time later. Now we're moving to clean lines. I've put all the sketching on one layer and then reduced the opacity to 30% so I can still see it as a guide, but it won't interfere. I'm using a black outline for my sketch because that works best with cartoons. I'm working section by section, starting with the eyes since they're our focal point. Notice I'm using confident, smooth strokes. If you mess up, just undo and try again. Procreate makes this forgiving. If you need to, hide your sketch layers to see the lines by themselves. This is where you can catch any stray marks or areas that need cleanup. Color organization is key for animation later. I'm creating separate layers for skin, turban, and accessories. This gives us control to animate each element independently. Notice they're all below the clean lines layer. I'm using the exact colors from my thumbnail, that turquoise and purple combo. This consistency helps viewers recognize the character. I'm working quickly here because these are just base colors. We'll add depth in the next step. I've also paused on the colors that I'm using so you can get the hex codes if you want to use the exact colors that I'm using. Now we add dimension. I've set this layer to multiply, keeping the opacity to 100%. This gives us soft, natural shadows. The key is building up gradually rather than going too dark immediately. Artists have different ways of doing this. For me, I like to just color it in black and then take the opacity down to about 30%. I'm thinking about where light naturally hits the face. Shadows go under the cheekbones, nose, and jawline. And for the turban, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm using colors for shadows instead of the black trick that I showed you before. Highlights bring everything to life. I'm using the same technique as I did on the shadows, but this time I'm just using white and then controlling the opacity of it. Just small touches on the high points, on the nose, the cheekbones, the top of the turban. Don't overdo it. You'll have much less highlights as you will on shadows. Subtlety is your friend. The last thing I'm going to do is add the pupils. I created a new layer on top of the white of the eyes part, and I set it to clipping mask. I used the same red color as I did for the dot in the middle of his forehead. I drew circles using my other finger to make the circle perfect, making spirals. I copied one that I did already and duplicated it and added it to the other eye so they would look the same. Then I add the shade in the top of the eye. And that's it. Okay, before we start animating, we need to isolate the eyes. That can be a daunting task when we have so many layers going on. So what I did was I duplicated my original file just in case I messed something up. I could always have one to go back to. And then what I did was I pinched together all the layers so that the artwork would be one flat layer. Now you have to be careful when you do this because sometimes strange things can happen when you start pinching a lot of layers together. You'll see some things start to disappear, and if they do, just two-finger untap to redo it, and then try pinching like fewer layers together until you get the whole picture the way it's supposed to look. The next thing I did was choose the little squiggly selection tool which is next to the arrow on top, and I set it to freehand so I could draw a line around the eyes. So I drew around one eye and then I drew around the other eye, and then I hit copy and paste. So now what we have is we have two sets of eyes, one on their own layer and then one that's with the whole picture itself. Then what I did was I took the one that was with the whole picture itself and I painted over them in the green color to cover them all up, which left me with eyes on a separate layer. And one last thing that I did before we start our animation was I drew off camera two more versions of our character at a 3/4 view and also a side view. The reason I did this off camera is because if we did it on camera, the video would be an hour long and nobody would probably watch it. So instead, I paused on the two different pictures so you could get a reference to draw your own. Okay, let's prepare for our animation. The first thing I'm going to do is go over into Procreate Dreams and set up my file. So click on the plus in the top right corner to start a new file. I'm going to choose HD, click on the title, which is Dreams and a number. Choose the very top choice, and we're going to change our frames per second to 12, which is frame by frame. And we're going to change the animation length to 15 seconds. If we need to adjust that later, we will. Alright, now let's bring in our Procreate files over into Procreate Dreams. So when you're in gallery view of Procreate, hold down on your file, don't pick your finger up until you can move it around. Get out of Procreate by still not picking your finger up. Go back into Procreate Dreams and then release your finger and it will import all your files into your timeline. The next thing I did was isolate the three different views onto different pieces of the timeline. And how I did that was I just identified where the front view was, I tapped on the clacker and hit edit split. Then I moved the timeline over to the 3/4 view, tapped on the clacker, hit edit split again, and then I had all three of those frames on different pieces on the timeline. So now we're able to copy paste and manipulate those as we will. Okay, and now we're ready to animate. So the first thing I did was I took my head that's looking straight on and I want it to stay on screen for a while when the video is first starting. So he's going to be looking at you for a little bit. So what I had to do was had to copy the forward facing frame and paste it in about 10 or 11 times. So after the forward looking face was on the screen for about 1 second, then I decided to go ahead and start my eye blink animation. And here's how I did that. I created a new track on top of the face, And this is where we're going to draw the blinking animation. So I'm using a studio pen and the color black, and I drew the eye where it was starting to close. On the next frame, it's closing a little more. And then on the third frame, it's completely shut. Now to save time, I copied the second frame and pasted it afterwards, and did the same thing for the first frame. That we only had to draw it 3 times. And then that gave us a complete blinking animation. So the next thing we needed to do is we needed to go back to our original drawing, go into the group, choose that turquoise color and color over the original eye to get rid of it. And we needed to do that for all of the frames. And then the last one is the original frame. He's back to full open again. So now I needed to do this for the right eye. So next thing we need to do is to color in the eye. So what I did was I created a new track under the black outline that we just drew. And this is going to be for my colors. So using the same studio pen, I just colored in white. And we did this for each frame of the eye. So the next thing I did was add the eye folds. So now I wanted to add in the spiral eyes. So I chose my red color. I went to the layer that the white part was on. I created a new layer on top of it, and I set it to clipping mask. So then whenever I drew, it only stay on the white part. Next we drew in our spirals. And finally we created a new layer, and we added in the white highlights. Make sure you turn off the clipping mask. The one under the eye also. And then we set the opacity on that layer. And there we have it, a fully blinking animation. So now what we're able to do is click on the layer little button there and draw a line through all the layers and group it together. So we're able to copy it and paste it anywhere else on the timeline to have a blink. Okay, the last animation is the head turn. This movement is going to be the secret sauce. Just a small head turn makes the character feel like they're breathing and alive. This is what separates good animation from great animation. So this process will be pretty simple. It's just going to be cutting and pasting. And then we're going to slip the 3/4 turn. We'll drag that frame down to our active timeline. We had turned it off previously, so let's turn it back on. So just going to be one frame of 3/4. The next frame will be the side view. We'll leave the side view on for about 4 or 5 frames, and then we'll reverse that process just by pasting in that 3/4 view again and then back to the front view. Okay, and now I want to make him turn his head to the other side. So this is easily done the same way we just did, but this time we're going to have to put a keyframe on there, a move and scale keyframe, and then you click on the 3 little dots where we usually set anchor points with, and we're going to flip our canvas horizontally, and then we'll just do this same process again until we get a head turn to the other side. And that's all there is to it. And the last thing we're going to add is some floating particles to the background. So create a new layer, drag it under all of the artwork, and just with a white color and a very small pen, I'm going to make some little spirals. I'm going to take the opacity down on them so they're barely visible. And then we're going to animate them using keyframes. So set your initial keyframe and then move your background slowly up or down. And I set one in the middle and then I set one at the end so I could make the particles change direction. So these floating particles add depth and movement to the background. They're drifting slowly from bottom to top, creating this dreamy atmosphere. The key is keeping them subtle. They support the character, not distract from it. The final step is making sure this loops seamlessly. All my animations return to their starting positions, so when it loops, there's no jarring jump. This is crucial for social media where videos auto-repeat. So on my timeline, I can see that it goes for 6 seconds long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the title again, and I'm going to readjust my animation length to 6 seconds. Now we have a seamlessly looping animation. And there you have it, from static sketch to living, breathing character. This is the exact process I use for all my portrait animations. Once you master this technique, the possibilities are endless. Different eye effects, expressions, color themes, your creativity is the only limit. I want to see what you create with this. If this tutorial helped you, smash that like button and subscribe for more Procreate tutorials every week. Drop a comment showing me your animated portrait. I reply to everyone, and if you want to dive deeper into eye techniques, check out this next video.